Since 2011, the Chinese Super League has grown massively, with clubs such as Guangzhou Evergrande and Shanghai Shenhua signing European and South American footballers for astronomical sums. Brazilian attacking midfielder Dario Conca opened the floodgates, signing a 2.5-year deal for £10 million from Fluminense to Guangzhou Evergrande. Now, 6 years later, the likes of Didier Drogba, Nicolas Anelka, Ezekiel Lavezzi, Hulk, Oscar and Tevez have made their way east. Along with them, some of Europe's big-name managers. And Chinese investment extends to clubs beyond its own borders. Chinese-based Recon Group helped themselves to 100% stake in Aston Villa for an estimated £76 million. But to an outsider, it looks like the Chinese are getting ready to take over the football world. Why are China spending so much money on football? Is it economics, culture, or something else? It would be natural to assume that investments of this scale would come because of economic growth. After all, over the last 2 decades, China has become one of the largest and fastest growing economies in the world, with 2007 to 2011 seeing China's economic growth be the equivalent of all of the G7 countries combined.
Well, the fundamentals of this are nothing to do with football. In November 2014, China's president made an announcement that he wants China to create a domestic sport economy worth $850 billion by 2025.
I mean, when you see the investment from the US, for instance, they have made their money and made a lot of money out on NFL and NHL and NBA franchises, businesses which are cartels. You don't have promotion and relegation, and that's how you protect the clubs that you have, the franchises you have, and then you just leverage massive commercial and television deals out of it. But that only works if you protect the brand and you don't allow anybody else to join unless they pay a lot of money to do it.
And whilst the Chinese Super League is growing in size, can it stand the test of time? Well, within China, football is still not the largest sport. That honour is reserved for basketball.
Why are they investing in these kind of areas? Who are actually owning these clubs and why? Because there's no profit to be made on the level of the investment. I mean, the amount of investment that's going in to get these kind of properties, to get these clubs, they are paying over the odds.
In Western and European culture, football has often been used by owners as a tool to accrue status and reputation and to further business and political interests.
I think it's incredibly troublesome investment from China. Everything is heavily restricted in China, and yet the investment from countries like that it is kind of welcomed with open arms without any question marks about the moral dimensions of it.
I think in terms of diplomacy, one of the things that the Chinese have been doing very shrewdly over the last 10 years is using their whole approach of stadium diplomacy, which is essentially working with countries to provide them with facilities. So in Gabon for the African Nations Cup, which essentially involves the Chinese building free of charge football stadiums. And in return for those football stadiums, the way in which Chinese culture works, it's very much premised on bilateralism. Is we'll give you something, you give us something. Interestingly, Gabon, Angola and Ghana all have oil reserves, and China has been very, very keen to access those oil reserves. The notions of soft power and diplomacy, because football is incredibly powerful. It's the people's game, but obviously the People's Republic doesn't play the people's game particularly well.
As China continues to become a major player in the European economy, football has become an opportunity on 2 levels. Firstly, it can play an important role in progressing the development of Chinese football, turning the game into a symbol of national pride. Secondly, and most immediately, it can create cultural bridges by using football as a catalyst for bringing Chinese culture into the globalised world. And China does have pockets of real fan culture.
I don't know why people are surprised by what's happening with China, because there are football fans there just as there are football fans everywhere else. And amongst certain fans, the culture is much more longitudinal, it's much more historic and much deeper than many people might imagine.
Fan culture in China has historically been stunted due to a sometimes oppressive government.
Would always been very difficult in China because during the Cultural Revolution there was a ban, I think, on gatherings of 5 people, it might be 7 people or something like that, which made it very difficult obviously to have 22 people playing a football match.
It's important too, I think, for people who are watching or listening to this to understand that China for a long time was culturally, politically and even geographically isolated. For anybody who's been to East Asia, there is almost a palpable sense of geographic isolation from the rest of the world. This is about China moving mainstream in many ways. It's about becoming less isolated politically, culturally, and even to a significant extent geographically as well.
So what was the spark that sent Chinese business interests into the wider world?
Xi Jinping, who comes to power, in China, and he is this massive football fan. His determination to change football came from watching Watford take the Chinese national team apart. And apparently, this anecdote that he gives, he storms out of the stadium halfway through the second half, and that's the original, that's the original sin where he decides that China won't be the whipping boy anymore in world football. And then he comes to power, and then what do we see? We see this straight away, this kind of strategy that's kind of announced that sports business, all sports business, will be an integral part of the Chinese brand and about Chinese business going forward internationally, and how to improve Chinese football, which involves actually fairly democratic reforms to the way Chinese football is organised already.
The Elite Football, or 50-point plan, was established in November 2014 in order to help China become a footballing superpower, winning the World Cup by 2050. This includes the construction of over 2,000 footballing academies across the country, as well as the introduction in 2017 of football into the curriculum, as well as rolling it out as an option in universities. China's football reform aims to transform something weak, China's poor national football side, and make it a strength, another asset in China's international dominance. This is an embodiment of the Chinese government's ideals, the country and the people working towards one overarching common goal and achieving it with the world watching.
And this opens the door for businessmen, like the richest men in China, to then heavily invest in football as a kind of cost, in a way. If you want to do business in China, you have to keep the party happy. And to do that, you have to basically invest in areas that will get you noticed and will get you business in return. It's about kind of projecting a Chinese economic power and also perhaps an alternative kind of cultural power as well, much like America did with Hollywood at the turn of the 20th century. China,
like the United States, likes to be seen as bigger and better and stronger and more successful than everybody else. So I think there is something about that.
Football is not just a sport, it's a welding point in the globalised world. Whether you believe that China are investing to build a cultural bridge with the West, to further their economic interests, or simply to reaffirm their international standing, one thing is clear: China is here to stay as a football power, and the future for the nation's emerging football fans could be very bright.